Welcome to Ancient Mysteries. I'm your host, Ben Carter, and in today's episode, we're unraveling a mystery etched into the walls of a temple in Egypt, a curious image that some believe holds the secret to ancient electricity. Could the ancients have mastered power long before Edison or Tesla? Or is it simply a misunderstood symbol? This is the enigma of the Egyptian light bulb. In the arid hills of Dendera, a city resting along the west bank of the Nile, stands one of Egypt's best-preserved temples, the Temple of Hathor. Unlike the more famous complexes at Karnak or Luxor, Dendera doesn't draw the same crowds. Yet its walls hold something that has electrified imaginations for decades. Inside a subterranean crypt, carved in striking relief, are images that have sparked debate, awe, and skepticism. Among them, a depiction that appears startlingly modern, a figure holding a large, bulb-shaped object with a curling filament inside, connected by what looks like a thick cord to a box resting on a pedestal. The carving is surrounded by baboon-like creatures, humans, and symbols consistent with Egyptian iconography. But the bulb itself? It doesn't resemble any known religious motif from the dynastic period. To some, it looks like a light bulb. And that's where the mystery begins. Mainstream archaeologists maintain that the image is symbolic. They interpret the carving as a representation of the lotus flower, emanating a snake, a symbol of creation, rebirth, and energy in Egyptian mythology. The bulb shape, they argue, is a stylized rendering of the lotus. The snake emerging from it represents the god Harsomtus, often depicted in serpent form, and the box-like object is believed to be a representation of the Jed pillar, an ancient symbol of stability. The entire composition, they claim, is spiritual rather than technological. But this explanation doesn't satisfy everyone. In the 20th century, alternative theorists began to ask a different question. What if the image wasn't symbolic? What if it was literal? Some engineers and physicists examining the carving remarked on its uncanny resemblance to a Crookes tube or an early form of electric discharge lamp. In this interpretation, the snake isn't a deity, it's a filament. The bulb isn't a lotus, it's a vacuum-sealed lamp. And the Jed pillar? A high-voltage power source. According to this fringe theory, the Egyptians may have possessed a basic form of electrical illumination, enabling them to light the interiors of tombs and temples without the use of soot-producing torches. They point out that no soot has been found on the ceilings of the deepest tombs, despite the absence of natural light. If torches weren't used, how were those spaces illuminated during construction and decoration? Skeptics push back hard against this notion. They argue that just because something looks familiar to modern eyes doesn't mean it served the same purpose. To them, the theory relies on visual pareidolia, seeing modern objects in ancient art that weren't intended to be interpreted that way. But the question lingers. If the carving is symbolic, why does it appear in an isolated underground chamber, far from public display, and without any accompanying text that clearly defines its meaning? Why would a symbolic scene be tucked away in a space that was never meant to be seen by the general public? This is the kind of riddle that continues to draw lines between orthodoxy and speculation. At Dendera, the lines between myth art and what we might call science seem to blur. What's left behind is an image that raises more questions than it answers, hinting at a possible knowledge lost to time, or at least a different way of seeing the world than we understand today. Ancient Egypt's grandeur wasn't limited to its pyramids or colossal statues. It extended deep into the cultural and spiritual frameworks that governed every aspect of life. The civilization was remarkably advanced for its time, masters of engineering, astronomy, medicine, and architecture. Yet, despite this sophistication, no records exist of them ever using artificial light in the way we do. That's what makes the notion of ancient electricity so provocative. If the Egyptians possessed even a rudimentary understanding of electric power, it would rewrite major chapters of human technological history. The Dendera temple complex, where the so-called light bulb images reside, was constructed during the Greco-Roman period, though it is believed to stand on foundations far older. Hathor, the goddess to whom the temple is dedicated, was revered as a deity of music, joy, motherhood, and the sky. Inside the crypts of this temple, chambers that were not open to the public, Priests carried out rituals and stored sacred objects. These rooms are small, enclosed and unlit, leading many to question how artisans could have carved such intricate scenes in complete darkness. Conventional answers suggest the use of polished copper mirrors to reflect sunlight deep into interior spaces. But this theory collapses under scrutiny. Repeated experiments by archaeologists and engineers have shown that mirrored light loses intensity rapidly and can't be projected into tight, enclosed areas. Besides, the use of torches or oil lamps would have left carbon soot, and yet, on the ceilings of these chambers, there's an inexplicable absence of residue. It's this puzzling lack of evidence for traditional lighting methods that gives room for the idea that the Egyptians might have used a different approach altogether. The earliest modern mention of the Dendera Light theory came in the 20th century. A handful of researchers and engineers, unconvinced by symbolic interpretations, started proposing that the Egyptians had some form of electrical lighting. They looked at the reliefs through a technological lens. Some claimed the bulb-shaped object resembled a Crookes tube, a vacuum-sealed glass cylinder that glows when an electric current passes through it. Others said it looked like a Geissler tube, an early light source developed in the 19th century. These comparisons sparked speculation. What if these ancient depictions were a memory or record of a technology long forgotten? To bolster the theory, proponents have pointed to other Egyptian artifacts. They highlight the presence of gold plating achieved through electroplating, a process that requires electrical current. They cite the Baghdad battery found in Iraq, a 2,000-year-old clay jar with copper and iron components, as a potential example of ancient electricity in a neighbouring culture. While no direct evidence connects this device to lighting technology, it feeds into the broader narrative that ancient peoples may have understood principles of electricity in ways not fully acknowledged by mainstream history. Still, the academic community remains skeptical. No wires, conductors, or battery-like devices have ever been found in Egypt. No inscriptions describe electric lighting, no schematics or detailed text suggest the use of power. But skeptics can't fully explain away the Dendera images either. The depiction is too specific, too precise in its form to be ignored. And if it isn't a light bulb, then what exactly is it? The Temple of Hathor holds many secrets, not just in the crypts, but in the very stones that have stood for millennia. Whether they hold literal truths or symbolic teachings, they continue to speak across time. As with so many enigmas of the ancient world, the line between metaphor and machine is thinner than it appears. The mystery takes on greater depth when considering the specifics of the Dendera carving. The central figure often appears holding the bulb-like object, with arms extended as if presenting or manipulating it. Inside the glass-shaped outline is a wavy serpent, stretching horizontally from base to tip. This, proponents argue, could represent a filament or plasma arc. The entire object connects to a box-like structure resembling an electrical insulator or power source, and the inclusion of the Jed pillar, commonly interpreted as a symbol of stability, has led to comparisons with modern electrical coils or transformers. Some even speculate that the Jed could represent a Tesla-like tower, capable of storing or transmitting energy wirelessly. Though this interpretation stretches the boundaries of mainstream acceptance, the engineering-minded see a puzzle worth considering. If a device was depicted repeatedly in a religious temple in multiple reliefs, was it simply symbolic? Or could it be referencing a real object, perhaps one whose function was considered divine? Ancient cultures often deified the unknown, especially when it involved light, power, or transformation. Fire was sacred, so was the sun. Is it so far-fetched to imagine that electricity, if known, would also be hidden behind layers of mysticism and mythology? Adding fuel to the theory is the inexplicable absence of lighting soot in deep tombs like that of Seti Firth, which stretches hundreds of feet into bedrock with walls completely adorned in vivid imagery. If torches were used, the artists would have needed dozens of them over weeks or months, yet the soot is nowhere to be found. Proponents of the electric light theory claim this is more than coincidence. They argue that traditional lighting methods were insufficient, and that the ancients developed a system using electric discharge, bright, clean, and controllable. but the evidence remains circumstantial. No actual light bulbs, power sources, or tools associated with electrical generation have been discovered in Egypt. Skeptics point out that a technology as transformative as electricity wouldn't simply vanish. If ancient Egyptians had truly harnessed power, it would have left a larger footprint: electrical components, infrastructure, texts, or knowledge passed down through generations. Its complete disappearance suggests the theory may be more fantasy than fact. However, the counter-argument lies in the idea of lost knowledge. History is not a straight line. Entire civilizations have collapsed, and with them, technologies have been buried, forgotten, or misinterpreted. The Roman recipe for concrete, used to build structures that still stand today, was lost for over 1,000 years. Greek fire, a powerful weapon used in naval warfare, was never fully replicated. Could ancient Egypt have harboured a small elite priesthood that preserved and concealed knowledge of a luminous tool? Another angle to consider is that of the artisan's perspective. Were the Dendera images simply the result of creative abstraction, a symbolic way to depict divine energy through familiar objects? In many ancient cultures, serpents represented power, life, and the unseen forces of the universe. The Egyptians associated snakes with the underworld, with energy, with creation and rebirth. The bulb might be a container for divine energy, the djed a pillar of the soul's journey, and the entire scene a metaphysical expression, not a technological one. Still, that doesn't erase the questions. Why would a symbol so advanced-looking appear so suddenly, with no predecessors or successors in Egyptian art? Why depict such an unusual object so clearly, so carefully, and repeat it in multiple chambers, hidden from the public eye? If it were merely symbolic, why not depict it in familiar ways, as was done with every other god and ritual? As the debate continues, the Dendera Light remains fixed in stone, a riddle without a clear solution, hinting at a forgotten page in the human story, waiting to be turned. In 2000, a team of researchers attempted to test the plausibility of the Dendera Light theory by recreating the scene with functioning equipment. Using a vacuum tube shaped like the one depicted in the relief, filled with a noble gas and connected to a basic power source, they were able to produce a glowing light, remarkably similar in appearance to what the carving suggested. This experiment, aired on international television, reignited interest in the theory and fueled the belief that the ancients may have possessed some rudimentary form of electric lighting. Though the experiment didn't prove the Egyptians actually used such technology, it demonstrated that the concept was technically viable, and, importantly, that it could have existed within the bounds of pre-industrial science. These experiments offered more than just spectacle. They brought new attention to Egypt's potential understanding of natural forces that have been long thought to belong to modern science. Static electricity was likely observed in ancient times, especially through contact with fur or amber. The electric catfish and Nile electric eel were both known to the Egyptians. Records show they respected and even feared these animals for their mysterious ability to shock. Could natural phenomena like these have inspired early experimentation? The idea becomes even more compelling when paired with the broader question of lost knowledge. Throughout ancient history, we see repeated suggestions that civilizations possessed and then lost technological insights. Whether it's the Antikythera mechanism from ancient Greece or the precise astronomical alignments of megalithic sites around the world, there's a pattern that suggests human understanding has waxed and waned over time. Could Egypt, often credited with mystical and scientific prowess, have briefly unlocked a form of illumination that left behind only suggestive echoes? Yet, the archaeological community remains unmoved. Most argue that without physical artifacts, conductive metals, insulated wires, ceramic insulators, there's no proof of an electrical system. Temples have been thoroughly excavated. No remnants of batteries, coils, or switches have been found. If electrical lighting did exist, it must have been constructed from materials that degraded quickly or were repurposed long ago. Critics suggest that it's far more likely that the image is allegorical, depicting themes of cosmic energy, divine birth, or spiritual awakening, all common in Egyptian temple art. Egyptologists emphasize that the Dendera relief fits comfortably within the established canon of Egyptian religious iconography. The lotus flower, often associated with creation myths, was a standard motif. The Jed pillar, present across dynasties, always symbolized stability and continuity. The serpent, too, was not new. It had long been linked to gods like Atum and Ra and to the cycle of life and death. To them, reading the image as a light bulb is akin to looking at a medieval painting of angels and declaring them astronauts because they seem to have wings and glow. Still, fringe theorists maintain that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. They argue that elite priesthoods may have had access to knowledge deliberately hidden from the general populace. Sacred technology, they believe, was reserved for rituals, closely guarded and eventually lost when temples fell into disuse or were repurposed during invasions and conquests. If such knowledge existed, it may have been considered too dangerous or too powerful for widespread use. Whatever the truth, the Dendera Light continues to stand as a focal point for one of the great debates in ancient studies, whether the past is simply what we think we know or something far stranger and more advanced than we can currently imagine. The lines between symbol and science remain blurred, and every unanswered question carved into stone only deepens the mystery. Among scholars, the Dendera Light remains a point of contention, but not because of what is definitively known, rather because of what cannot be proven or disproven with certainty. Academic interpretations focus on context. The Dendera reliefs are part of a broader tradition of ritual art meant to preserve cosmic balance and reflect mythological narratives. In this framework, the imagery is not meant to be read as literal but symbolic, encoding religious knowledge that only initiated priests were trained to interpret. This is where the heart of the scholarly argument lies, understanding the cultural lens through which ancient Egyptians viewed the world. Symbolism was everything in Egyptian art. The gods did not walk in human form but appeared as falcons, cats, crocodiles, or abstract constructs. Light was sacred, associated with Ra, the sun god, who travelled through the underworld each night only to be reborn at dawn. The snake in the Dendera image is seen by scholars as Harsumtus, a deity represented as a serpent rising from a lotus, an act that metaphorically signifies birth, energy, and resurrection. The Jed pillar beside it is often interpreted as the spine of Osiris, a representation of continuity, life force, and cosmic order. From this perspective, the entire scene is a spiritual metaphor, not a depiction of technology. Experts argue that ancient Egypt's real brilliance wasn't in lost science, but in a worldview that blurred the line between the physical and the metaphysical. Their achievements in architecture, medicine, and astronomy were deeply tied to ritual. Temples were not places of public worship, but repositories of sacred knowledge, where cosmic cycles were mirrored in earthly structures. To suggest a literal light bulb, they argue, is to misinterpret a complex spiritual language through the lens of modern expectation. Nevertheless, even within academic circles, there are quieter debates. Some Egyptologists concede that ancient artisans may have experimented with different forms of illumination, even if it wasn't electrical. Mineral-based lamps, reflective stones, and chemical compounds capable of glowing in darkness have all been posited. The idea that the Egyptians might have used unconventional methods in enclosed spaces is not universally rejected. It's the leap to full electrical technology that remains controversial. Part of the skepticism also comes from a broader concern. Once fringe theories gain traction, they can overshadow the real achievements of ancient civilizations. By attributing their accomplishments to lost high technology, or even extraterrestrial influence, we risk underestimating their genuine intelligence, creativity, and resourcefulness. Ancient Egypt did not need electric lights to be considered advanced. Its real sophistication lies in its monumental planning, astronomical precision, and rich symbolic legacy that continues to captivate the world. Still, the allure of the unknown persists. The Dendera image doesn't sit comfortably in any single category. It resists tidy classification, defies easy dismissal, and endures as a puzzle open to both scientific scrutiny and philosophical interpretation. Scholars can explain what they believe the symbol means, but they cannot erase the eerie resemblance it bears to a piece of modern technology. And that sliver of ambiguity, thin though it may be, is enough to keep both camps arguing, speculating, and searching. In that sense, the mystery serves its oldest purpose: to provoke wonder, ignite curiosity, and keep the past forever just beyond our grasp. Outside of academia, the theory has taken on a life of its own. Fringe researchers, independent historians, and ancient technology enthusiasts continue to build their own frameworks around the Dendera Light, often weaving it into a broader narrative of forgotten science and suppressed knowledge. These theorists point to what they consider global patterns, suggestive hints that ancient civilizations may have had access to technologies we are only beginning to rediscover. To them, the Dendera relief is not an isolated curiosity, but part of a vast, global legacy of hidden advancement. One of the most vocal proponents of this view was Erich von Däniken, whose 1968 book, Chariots of the Gods, proposed that extraterrestrials influenced ancient human civilizations. While the book itself doesn't focus on the Dendera Light, its popularity helped pave the way for a wide range of alternative theories, all of which operate under a central belief that mainstream history underestimates ancient knowledge. More recent theorists have integrated the Dendera image into claims that ancient power grids once spanned the globe, that monuments were aligned for energetic purposes, and that ancient temples may have doubled as energy reactors, transmitting wireless power. In this speculative ecosystem, the Dendera Light is treated not as an isolated artifact, but as a smoking gun. Supporters cite the absence of soot, the complexity of construction techniques, and anomalies in megalithic structures as evidence that ancient civilizations were not only capable, but perhaps far ahead of their time. Some even go so far as to suggest that this knowledge was not human at all, that it may have been gifted, inherited, or rediscovered from beings far older or wiser than our recorded history allows. The internet has amplified these theories exponentially. Videos and blog posts offer digital reconstructions of the supposed Dendera device in action, lighting up in eerie purple-blue hues with arcs of simulated electricity. Some even claim to have recreated working models using vacuum tubes and high-voltage current, though these often lack scientific rigor or repeatability. Nevertheless, the visual impact is powerful. To a curious mind already inclined to question mainstream narratives, these images seem to validate the belief that the ancients were capable of far more than we've been told. Popular culture, too, has embraced the idea. Documentaries on cable networks and streaming platforms routinely reference the Dendera Light when discussing ancient mysteries. It has become part of the visual lexicon of alternative history, one of those iconic images that, like the Nazca Lines or the Moai of Easter Island, evokes a sense of deep, unsolved enigma. It appears in conspiracy forums, YouTube thumbnails, and even in video games and graphic novels, where it is often used as a symbol of lost power and secret wisdom. Critics argue that this visibility distorts public understanding. By focusing on the fantastical, it diverts attention from the real achievements of ancient people and encourages a kind of historical laziness. But supporters see it differently. To them, the Dendera Light invites a different kind of engagement, not with fantasy, but with possibility. It asks not only what we know, but what we might have forgotten. And in that space between certainty and speculation, the human imagination thrives. The fringe interpretations may never be accepted in scholarly journals, but they've carved out a permanent space in the broader cultural narrative. Whether seen as pseudoscience or visionary insight, the theory refuses to fade. Instead, it continues to grow, fueled by curiosity, mystery, and a deep, enduring hunger to understand the secrets of the ancient world. Today, the influence of the Dendera Light theory stretches far beyond temple walls or academic circles. It has embedded itself into modern consciousness, shaping how people view not only ancient Egypt, but the capabilities of ancient civilizations as a whole. Books, online forums, documentaries, and even classroom debates now regularly reference the image as a touchstone for alternative thinking. Whether as a serious hypothesis or a cultural curiosity, the idea has gained momentum in a world increasingly fascinated by the mysteries of the past and the gaps in our understanding. Artists and writers have seized on the image's striking form and implied power, incorporating it into science fiction, speculative fiction, and visual art. In video games like Assassin's Creed Origins, The blend of ancient Egyptian aesthetics and mysterious technology has brought the Dendera Light and similar concepts to mainstream audiences. Here, the past is reimagined not as a primitive world of superstition, but as a realm of hidden knowledge and lost science. In these recreations, glowing tubes and humming pillars do not feel out of place, they feel plausible. The appeal is partly emotional. The idea that the ancients may have touched the same elemental forces we take for granted today creates a powerful sense of continuity across time. If the Egyptians lit their temples with electric light, it changes how we think about their intelligence, their innovation, and their legacy. It suggests a past less separate from us, one that might still speak to our present in meaningful ways. In a modern world that often feels disconnected from its roots, such a possibility can be deeply reassuring and deeply thrilling. Beyond entertainment, the Dendera Light has also influenced certain areas of experimental science. Researchers intrigued by ancient technologies have started exploring what's called archaeoengineering, a field that re-examines old myths and artifacts for potential practical applications. While most of this work exists at the fringes of academia, it reflects a growing openness to unconventional questions. Could ancient architectural techniques inspire new, energy-efficient buildings? Could forgotten materials or methods offer sustainable alternatives to modern systems? In these circles, the Dendera image isn't proof of ancient electricity. It's a prompt, a symbol of what we might rediscover by thinking differently. Social media has also amplified the mystery. Platforms like TikTok and Instagram have turned bite-sized history into viral content, and the Dendera Light, visually compelling and immediately intriguing, performs exceptionally well. Short videos explaining the theory rack up millions of views, often blending factual history with dramatic speculation. The result is a new generation of amateur historians, myth chasers, and skeptics alike, all participating in an ongoing dialogue that spans continents and centuries. Even in classrooms and museums, the question occasionally surfaces. Tour guides at Dendera are frequently asked about the light bulb. Some address it directly, others deflect it. But the question is always there, waiting. In many ways, this persistence is the theory's greatest achievement, not in proving ancient electricity, but in keeping the past alive, dynamic, and open to reinterpretation. The Dendera Light has evolved from a strange carving in a dark chamber into a cultural icon of mystery. Its form, its location, and the questions it inspires continue to ripple through modern thought, challenging assumptions and inviting curiosity. Whether symbol, tool, or something in between, it reminds us that ancient stories still have the power to illuminate the present. Despite decades of debate, experimentation, and reinterpretation, the truth about the Dendera Light remains elusive. In the end, no discovery has definitively proven that the ancient Egyptians possessed electrical technology. There are no copper wires buried beneath the sand, no fragments of glass tubes unearthed from crypt floors, and no blueprints carved into stone walls explaining how such a device might have worked. Yet, the image persists, both physically in the Temple of Hathor and culturally in the minds of millions, as a symbol of something lost, hidden, or misunderstood. Perhaps the greatest legacy of the Dendera Light isn't whether it worked or even whether it existed in a functional sense, but in the questions it continues to raise. It forces us to confront how much we assume about the past, how easily we dismiss possibilities that don't align with our established timelines. The image carved into stone over 2,000 years ago refuses to be neatly categorized. That alone makes it worth examining, not only for what it may or may not be, but for what it challenges in our perception of history. In the orthodox view, the Dendera relief is an example of mythological symbolism, consistent with thousands of other depictions across Egypt. It fits into a worldview where gods were abstract forces, and where artistic language was intended to convey cosmic truths rather than literal facts. In the alternative view, it is a misfiled piece of technological history, an artifact left behind by a forgotten science or an erased civilization. The two interpretations stand on either side of a chasm, and no amount of debate has yet built a bridge wide enough to span it. But the image endures, and that matters. It endures because it evokes wonder. It endures because it refuses to be solved with a simple answer. It asks something of us, not only to learn, but to imagine. And that act of imagining, of allowing ourselves to entertain the improbable, the fantastic, the deeply mysterious, is perhaps the most human thing of all. Whether one sees a lotus and a snake or a vacuum tube and a filament, the carving compels us to look closer, think deeper, and question harder. In the grand tapestry of ancient mysteries, the Dendera Light is a single thread. But like many threads in a great weaving, its true purpose may only become clear when seen as part of a much larger pattern. It may lead to more questions than answers, but those questions keep the conversation alive. They keep history from going static. They keep the past from becoming silent. So, was it a symbol of divine power or an artifact of forgotten technology? A sacred image of cosmic birth or a coded reference to electrical illumination? We may never know for certain, but that's precisely what makes it a mystery worth remembering. Thanks for listening. This has been another episode of Ancient Mysteries. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you'd like to support the show, subscribe to Ancient Mysteries on Spotify. Subscribe now.